Welcome back to Stop Fainting Snippets, and on our series on palpitations, I'd like to ask you, Boone, one common symptom that a lot of people report is the sense of palpitations or their heart racing at night. So they're resting in bed, either on the sofa watching TV or in bed, and they get this sudden onset of palpitations, which is obviously not, can you tell us a bit about that? What does it mean?
So that's really strange, because if you think about syncope or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS, one of the ways in which we explain that is patients stand up, or they have to fight gravity, or they have to be dehydrated and the blood pulls down. We activate adrenaline. The adrenaline causes the heart rate to pick up its pace and people get palpitations. So this palpitations at night story is really interesting because you're not fighting gravity when you're sleeping in bed. And this is from experience, it's more of a flavor rather than anything in the scientific literature. But my hunch, and I guess it comes from seeing patients improve with the therapy, is that there is an element of what we call blood pressure dump that occurs whilst you're lying flat. And in my mind, one of the things that makes sense about blood pressure falling in bed is if you had a degree of mast cell activation. So I cannot prove this, but your mast cells are essentially immune cells that contain histamine. And histamine is the thing that you want to prevent being released to cause your hay fever. That's why we take antihistamines in the hay fever season. But it's also the thing that you take for a bee sting, for a nettle rash, and that quickly quietens down that inflammatory wheel that we see. Now, what is histamine? It's something that's released and it makes the blood vessels very permeable. And that word means it becomes very, very available for the internal fluid to seep through.
Because in the context of a bee sting, that's what they need to do.
Yeah, so your white cells need to penetrate the lining of your blood vessels to get to the toxins to fight them. And so it becomes inflamed. But if you're sleeping at night and for some reason your mast cells degranulate and your blood vessels internally and as well as that externally, so patients can often wake up with a rash, but even internally, your organs, for example, your gut is a huge reservoir of blood, and you can unfold all the microvilli, the small capillary beds within your gut to fill half a tennis court. That's how much blood can pool in your gut. If you have mast cell degranulation and your gut pulls with blood, you are going to have a blood pressure dump just like you would as you were standing up for a long time. And that triggers that adrenaline reaction. And so you wake up with the sensation of these palpitations. And the proof of the pudding is if you start to take a nighttime antihistamine, and antihistamines are so commonly available now, you can get it at your chemist without prescription. And if you trial an antihistamine, if you have POTS and you have these kind of phenomena at night, if you find that it cures it or gets rid of it, then continue taking it because you are likely to have the histaminergic response at night occurring when the mast cells degranulate.
And some people, of course, may consider a low histamine diet, which is watching your diet for things like tomatoes or certain other vegetables.
If you just Google low histamine diet, you'll find a list of things to avoid. I just want to caution slightly against the low histamine diet, which is to say that if you're in prime health, you're drinking, hydrating, salting well, and you're not constantly on an adrenaline high, because one of the things that can sensitize mast cells to degranulate easier, i.e. to have that response come in, is a high amount of adrenaline. And we know this now. I've shared stories about my own daughter who, when stressed, will suddenly get what's called chronic idiopathic urticaria. So she's got a histamine problem that gets triggered with stress. And I've seen this firsthand in family members as well as myself. And I think, Mel, you also have shared with me that during periods of stress, you can break out in a rash. So this is more commonly seen than we acknowledge
or understand.
Or understand.
Because a lot of this is still debated, isn't it? MCAS and what it means, but we know about the overlap with POTS.
Yeah, but the caution with the histamine diet is it's a fairly restricted diet. And actually, if you're well and you're drinking, you're salting, you're compressing, and you're in a good headspace, you're breathing well, and you're not so adrenergically driven, and you don't have that many nights where you're having this mast cell, presumably mast cell activation with palpitations, then should you need to be strict with the histamine diet for the rest of your life? No. So I think this is the kind of thing that can wax and wane, and you should be more aware. And I think having awareness of your triggering conditions, not necessarily your diet, but when you go to bed, you know you've had a long day, maybe a bit of alcohol, so you're a bit vasodilated. It's a hot day, so you're sweating lots. The blood pressure is already low.
You've been on your feet all day.
Yeah. So these are all trigger factors or priming factors, let's say, which allows the trigger to happen. But if you've had a great day, I don't think you need to come away from a normal diet and go onto that very restrictive histamine diet for the sake of a symptom once every month.
And I think the other thing sometimes is that people will look at their watches or their trackers and get quite nervous if they see that their heart rate is going up to, say, 130, 140, or sometimes at night down to 30, 40. Do you have any advice on how to just avoid being too worried about that and maybe focusing on how you feel?
So stop wearing a tracker. I mean, I'll stop looking at the tracker and actually guide yourself with symptoms.
Because the numbers themselves can be very
variable,
irrelevant, can't they, to the actual presentation?
And I think we have a focus here of looking at symptoms. And if somebody's heart rate, and in particular, if it can drop to, say, 35 beats per minute, as long as the patient is not symptomatic, it's not something that I would generally worry about.
Great. Thank you. And see you again.